The studio lights were already blinding when Harrison Ford entered the set of The View, not out of discomfort, but out of habit. Because for decades he had walked through soundstages, sets, and interviews with the same cool grit that defined his public image. But today was different, not just because it was live, or because the panel had grown increasingly confrontational in recent weeks, but because from the moment Whoopi Goldberg introduced him, there was a subtle friction in the air. A tension that neither the producers nor the audience quite anticipated. And it began, innocently enough, with a question about the state of political activism in Hollywood, to which Ford offered a sharply worded answer, calling much of modern performative outrage inauthentic noise dressed up as moral clarity. And while the crowd chuckled in surprise, Whoopi didn't smile. Instead, she leaned in, asking if he thought celebrities had no responsibility to speak up. And Ford replied with characteristic bluntness, "Not when they don't know what they're talking about," which immediately triggered audible gasps and an instant tightening of Whoopi's expression as she fired back about the privilege of silence, and the exchange escalated fast, with Ford attempting to walk his comment back, clarifying that uninformed activism often drowns out real experts, but Whoopi wasn't having it, accusing him of dismissing voices simply because they came from entertainers. And Ford, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged so directly on live daytime television, let his frustration rise, saying, "I came here to talk about my film, not to get dragged into your crusade," which visibly stunned the co-hosts and set the tone for a rare moment of actual combustion on a show known for heated but ultimately managed debates. And as the audience sat in nervous silence, Whoopi leaned forward and delivered a pointed monologue about the dangers of dismissing public platforms when they can be used to speak for the voiceless. A statement that should have ended it diplomatically, but Ford wasn't done. Instead, he replied with, "Maybe if we spent more time listening, instead of turning every panel into a battleground, we'd all be better off." A line that cut through the set like a sharp gust of wind. And for a moment, no one spoke, until Whoopi stood up, which wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, and wasn't missed by the director, who didn't cut to commercial in time before she said directly to him, "Then maybe you should have stayed in your movie, Harrison." And it was in that instant that everything fell apart, because Ford, stunned, turned to the producers off camera and calmly said, "I'm done," took off his mic, and walked off stage. Not angrily, not in a tantrum, but with the same cold precision that made his screen characters iconic. And the internet exploded within minutes, with clips circulating across every platform, from YouTube to TikTok, some calling it a generational clash, others labeling it as ego versus ego, and within hours, both Ford's reps and the network issued competing statements, one insisting he had been ambushed, the other defending Whoopi's right to challenge a guest's public position. And while fans were split, one undeniable truth emerged from the wreckage. This wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't rehearsed controversy. It was two seasoned icons colliding in real time under real pressure in front of a nation that couldn't stop watching. And while Whoopi addressed it the next day with a carefully worded "things got heated," and that happens, Ford remained publicly silent, declining interviews and refusing to elaborate further, letting the headlines swirl and the culture do what it does best: spin the moment into meaning, into debate, into tribal outrage and clipped soundbites. But those closest to him said he didn't regret a word, that he felt the conversation had veered into moral grandstanding and wasn't worth salvaging, while others within the industry quietly admired that he didn't play along with the expected performance of apology and reconciliation. And The View, meanwhile, enjoyed a ratings spike, renewed social engagement, and yet another notch in its belt of controversy that only made the platform feel more urgent, more dangerous, more central to the nation's divided soul. But behind all of it, behind the trending tags and the studio lights, was a simple truth few wanted to admit: that two legends had clashed not because they disagreed, but because they represented two kinds of truth-telling, one forged in experience and caution, and one in urgency and public moral clarity. And between those two fires, no one could say who burned brighter. Only that for one unforgettable broadcast, they both lit up the screen, In the days following Harrison Ford's abrupt departure from The View, media outlets scrambled to reconstruct the exact sequence of the on-air implosion, dissecting every raised eyebrow, every clipped phrase, every second of silence that passed between Ford and Whoopi, like forensic analysts trying to explain a cultural tremor in real time. And as clips continued to dominate social platforms, with slowed-down edits and reaction videos multiplying by the minute, Ford's silence only deepened the intrigue. Because in a world driven by instant apologies, clarifications, and public spin, the absence of a follow-up felt like a statement in itself. A refusal to participate in the machine that turned drama into brand currency. And while Whoopi returned to the show the next day with a half smile and a line about sometimes people can't handle grown-up conversations, the audience felt the weight behind her words. And even her co-hosts shifted nervously, careful not to reignite a fire that clearly hadn't cooled, but instead was smoldering beneath the surface of public opinion. Because this wasn't just about an interview gone bad, it had become a referendum on generational friction, on who gets to speak and how and why and with what tone. And somewhere in all of that was a 17-year-old movie legend who had simply grown tired of navigating the emotional minefields of modern media. Because while Ford had always been blunt, even gruff, the world had changed. Every sentence was now mined for subtext, every pause labeled problematic. And his resistance to play the language games of modern celebrity culture had turned a scheduled promo appearance into a flashpoint for something much larger. And meanwhile, the network faced its own internal reckoning, as producers were called into closed-door meetings about guest protocols, audience management, and whether the surprise pivot to hot-button topics had violated any pre-show agreements. Because while live TV thrives on unpredictability, no one wanted to be the one who chased away one of Hollywood's last real movie stars. And across the country, viewers split into factions, some praising Whoopi for holding a powerful man accountable, others calling Ford's walkout